Dominic Sever did not make reservations. He did not need to. The moment his black SUV rolled to a stop outside Leland Steakhouse, the maitre was already clearing the corner booth, the one with sightlines to every exit, the one they kept perpetually reserved under a ghost name, the one no ordinary customer had ever been permitted to touch. The staff moved the way people moved around exposed electrical wires, quickly, carefully, without looking directly at the source. Dominic stepped inside at precisely 8:14. He was not a large man in the way people expected power to look. He did not take up extra space with his shoulders or announce himself with volume. He was lean, composed, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than the restaurant's monthly liquor bill. His hair was dark and cut close at the temples. His face was the kind of face that had stopped being readable to most people somewhere around his 38th year, which was to say, it had stopped letting people in entirely. He controlled 6 blocks of the financial district, 2 city councilmen, and a port authority contract that laundered more money per quarter than most legitimate businesses turned over in a decade. In certain circles, his name was said the way people said the names of weather events, carefully and usually only after the fact. He sat. His men positioned themselves at the bar and near the front entrance without being told. The booth sealed around him like a vault. At 8:17, a woman appeared at the edge of his table and set down a glass of water without spilling a drop. He did not look up immediately. He had learned early in life that the deliberate withholding of attention was its own kind of authority. He finished reading the line in the document on his phone, then he looked. Her name tag said June. She was somewhere in her late 20s, maybe early 30s. It was hard to place her precisely, the way some people simply resist easy categorization. She was full-figured in a way that was entirely unapologetic. Her white button-down shirt tucked into a black skirt, her dark hair pulled back from her face with the efficiency of someone who had not had time to fuss with it. She was not looking at him the way people usually looked at him. She was looking at his water glass, checking the level, and she had a small notebook open in her left hand and a pen already uncapped in her right. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was even. "Can I start you off with something from the bar while you look at the menu?" Dominic set his phone face down on the table. "I don't need the menu. All right." She did not fill the silence the way nervous people did. She simply waited, pen positioned. The ribeye, rare. No garnish, no sauce, nothing on the plate that shouldn't be there. Any sides? No. She wrote it down. She did not smile at him or thank him for his order or tell him it was a great choice. She simply nodded, capped the pen, closed the notebook, and turned to go, which was precisely when the man at the next table, a heavy-set real estate developer named Garrett Foss, who had been on his 3rd bourbon since 6:30, and who apparently mistook his own net worth for social permission, said, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear, "Lord, they'll hire anyone these days, won't they?" He was not talking to anyone in particular. He was talking to the ambient air, the way drunk men did when they wanted a laugh without the accountability of a direct audience. June's shoulders did not tighten. She continued walking toward the kitchen as if she had not heard him, as if she had heard it so many times that her nervous system had simply reclassified it as background noise, the same as a passing truck or a chair scraping across a floor. Dominic watched her go. Then he turned his eyes to Garrett Foss. Foss caught the look about 3 seconds after it had already assessed him, catalogued him, and found him largely inconsequential. The man's odzibodo flickered. "Do you have a problem with your server?" Dominic asked. His voice was quiet. That was the thing people always noted afterward in the retelling, that it was so quiet, like the particular stillness before a pressure change. Foss blinked. No, I was just. Because if you did," Dominic said, "I would be curious to hear you explain it." There was a pause. The 2 men at the bar had not moved, but they had oriented slightly in Foss's direction, the way compass needles reorient toward north. Foss said nothing. He turned back to his drink. Dominic returned to his phone. He did not think about it again, or he told himself he didn't. What he did notice, with the same dispassionate precision he applied to everything, was that June was good at her job. Not good in the way that earned compliments or prompted managers to single her out for praise. Good in the way that competence is often invisible. The water glass was refilled before he reached for it. The check from the adjacent table was processed without interruption to his own meal. And when a couple near the window flagged her down at the same moment, a busboy dropped a tray of glasses 3 feet from his booth. She handled all 3 vectors simultaneously, without her expression changing. He had spent 20 years building an organization that ran on exactly that kind of quiet, effective, unnoted precision. He recognized it the way a craftsman recognizes quality work, not with enthusiasm, but with a certain involuntary attention. When she brought his food, he said without planning to, "How long have you worked here?" She paused, set the plate down. 4 years, full-time? Something shifted, almost imperceptibly, in her expression. Not defensiveness, more like the recalibration of a person who has learned to take stock of unexpected variables. "I do accounting part-time for a few small businesses. This is evenings and weekends." He looked at her. "Accounting? Yes. What kind?" She seemed to decide that this was a strange enough conversation that it warranted being given a moment of direct attention. She turned slightly toward him. "Mostly reconciliation work, catching errors in receivables, flagging inconsistencies in ledgers. Small places that can't afford a full accounting department. You catch errors. That's most of what accounting is, if you do it honestly," she said. "Finding where the numbers don't tell the same story twice." He picked up his fork. "And do they often not tell the same story twice?" "More often than the business owners like to hear." A very small, entirely involuntary thing happened at the corner of her mouth. It was not quite a smile. It was the expression of someone who had made peace with being the bearer of unwelcome truths. "Have a good meal," she said, and returned to her other tables. Dominic ate his steak. It was cooked exactly as he had specified. He did not notice this consciously because he had learned to expect things to be done correctly. What he did notice was that he had asked a stranger 4 questions in a row, which was approximately 4 more than he typically asked. He filed it away under nothing, under the category of irrelevant data that does not require a response. He came back the following Tuesday. He had 3 meetings in the financial district, and Leland's was 4 blocks from his last one. That was the logical explanation, and it was also entirely sufficient, and he did not examine it further. June was not his server. A younger man named Chris handled his table, was efficient enough, and made the mistake of trying to make small talk about the game. Dominic did not respond to this. He ate, reviewed documents on his tablet, and left a tip that was generous in proportion, because he had a policy about tipping that had nothing to do with personal warmth. He saw June twice, once refilling waters at a large table near the window, once speaking quietly to an older gentleman who appeared to be distressed about something on his bill. She had her notebook open. She was showing him something on the receipt, pointing to a specific line item with her pen, and whatever she said resolved the man's expression from agitated to settled in less than 90 seconds. He left without acknowledging that he had noticed any of this. The 3rd time he came in on a Thursday, she was assigned to his section. "Mr. Sever," she said, because the staff apparently briefed each other on preferences, or she had simply retained his name from the last time. "The usual." He regarded her for a moment. "You remember, ribeye, rare, nothing unnecessary on the plate." She had already uncapped the pen. "It's a memorable order. Why?" "Because most people treat rare as a suggested guideline. You mean it." She said it without inflection. "Water's fine, or would you like something else?" "Water," he said, "and then sit down." She looked at him. "I have a question," he said, "and I'd like to ask it at a normal conversational register, rather than at an angle." The expression on her face was something he had not seen directed at him in a very long time. It was not fear. It was not flattery. It was the expression of a person doing a rapid, unimpressed cost-benefit analysis. She glanced at her other tables. 2 were settled with drinks. 1 hadn't arrived yet. And then she sat across from him in the booth, on the very edge, with the posture of someone who has not decided yet whether this is a good idea. "You do reconciliation work," he said. "Catching errors in ledgers." "I mentioned that. I have a position." He watched her face. "My organization manages a significant volume of financial transactions. The person currently overseeing reconciliation is retiring. I need someone precise, discreet, and capable of not asking questions that aren't their job to ask." A long pause. "That's a very interesting way to describe a job," June said. "It's an accurate one. What kind of organization?" He looked at her steadily. He did not answer. She absorbed this. She was quiet for a moment in the way that intelligent people are quiet, not emptily, but with something visibly happening behind it. "I don't think I'm the right fit," she said. Her voice was careful, even, "but thank you." She stood, smoothed her skirt, and returned to work. He watched her go, and something that lived in a very old, very sealed-off part of Dominic Sever. Something that had not registered surprise in approximately 12 years. Registered surprise. He had Vincent look into her the next morning. Not deeply, he told himself it was routine, the same precaution he extended to anyone who entered his peripheral orbit. Her name was June Mallory, 29. Accounting degree from a state school in Ohio, graduated 4th in her class, passed her CPA exam on the first attempt, which put her in the 30% bracket, statistically. She had left a position at a regional accounting firm 3 years ago, under circumstances that Victor's contact described vaguely as a disagreement over how to handle a discrepancy in a client account. She had been waiting tables since. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park with a roommate. She had no debt beyond a small student loan balance. She sent money to her mother in Cincinnati every month. She had, apparently, found an error in a client's books that the firm's senior partner preferred remain unfound. She had reported it. She had been asked to let it go. She had not. And she had been managed out shortly thereafter. Dominic read the summary twice. He set it down on his desk and looked out at the city for a moment, which was not something he usually did in the middle of a workday. She was not expecting him to come back so soon. He could tell by the slight recalibration in her expression when she appeared at his table on Saturday evening and found him there again. "Rebuy," he said, before she could ask. She wrote it down. She was turning to go when he said her name, her last name, which she had not given him. She stopped, turned back. He watched her put together what the use of her last name meant, that he knew it, that he had obtained it through means she had not consented to, and he watched her decide how to respond to that information. Most people, when confronted with the evidence of his reach, defaulted to one of two things, fear or performance. She did neither. Her face went very still in the manner of someone setting down unnecessary weight. "Mr. Sever," she said. "The situation at your previous firm," he said. "The discrepancy you flagged." A breath. "That's not public information." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She looked at him for a long moment. "Is this meant to be threatening?" "No." "Then what is it?" "It's context," he said, "for why I think you're the right fit and you think you aren't." Her jaw tightened slightly. "I already told you. You told me you weren't the right fit," he said. "I'm suggesting that what you meant was that you weren't comfortable with the ambiguity." "Which is different, the ambiguity," she repeated, and the flatness in her voice was almost sharp. "What my organization does to generate capital," he said, "is not your concern. What happens to that capital once it arrives on a ledger, that is, you would see numbers, clean numbers, by the time they reach you. Your job is to make sure they stay that way. Nothing more, nothing less." That's a very tidy way to describe something that isn't tidy. "Most things aren't tidy," he said. "The question is whether the part you're responsible for can be." She stared at him. He had the unusual experience of feeling genuinely scrutinized, of having someone look at him not as a threat to avoid or an asset to secure, but as a problem to think through carefully. "You looked into me," she said. "I did. That's invasive." "Yes, you're not going to apologize for it." "No." She exhaled once, slowly. "What does it pay?" He named a figure. He watched something flicker across her face. Not greed, exactly. More the expression of someone doing math quickly and landing somewhere unexpected. "That's more than I made at the firm," she said. "I know what you made at the firm." "Right." Another pause. "I would need a contract, clear scope of responsibilities, and I would need it in writing that anything I flag gets addressed." "I don't look the other way. That's not something I'll negotiate." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "You know, it's why you're sitting across from me and Chris isn't." Something happened in her expression then, a small, involuntary thing, almost like the moment before a person decides whether to laugh. She suppressed it, but he had seen it. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking." She nodded once, picked up her notebook and went to put in his order. She called the number on the card he had left. He had left it under the water glass without announcing it, which she would tell him later was extremely annoying as a method of information delivery. On Tuesday morning. She said yes. She said it like someone completing a calculation they'd been running for 3 days, which he understood was exactly what it was. She started the following Monday. The first 3 months were professional, efficient. She was, as he had expected, precise in a way that bordered on artistry. She could find a misfiled deduction in a spreadsheet, the way a musician finds an off note. Not by searching for it, but by feeling the wrongness of it before she could name it. She flagged 7 inconsistencies in the first 6 weeks, 3 of which his previous accountant had apparently decided to accommodate rather than address. She sent her reports directly to him, clearly labeled, with a 1-paragraph summary at the top that assumed he was intelligent enough to not need things explained twice. She did not ask questions that were not her job to ask. She also did not pretend not to notice things, which he found unexpectedly to be a relief. What she did not do for those 3 months was look at him as anything other than an employer. He noticed, he was specific about not noticing, he was largely unsuccessful. There was an afternoon in the 4th month when she came to his office to go over a quarterly report, and arrived to find him on the phone in a conversation that required him to speak with a particular kind of quiet specificity, the kind that ended negotiations rather than opened them. And she stood in the doorway and waited. And when he hung up, she walked in and set the report on his desk and said, without preamble, page 7, 3rd column. Someone's been rounding up on currency conversions. It's small, but it's consistent, which means it's deliberate. He looked at page 7. He looked at her. How small? $280 a month, individually. Across all accounts, closer to $4,000. For how long? Best I can trace it, about 14 months. He was quiet for a moment. Good catch. It's my job, she said. And then, because she was the only person in his life who simply said what she meant rather than what was strategic, you should probably talk to whoever set up that conversion protocol. Either they did it on purpose or they didn't check their own work, and I'd want to know which. I'll handle it. I know you will, she said. The same way she had once told him she knew what rare meant, with a matter-of-factness that was entirely free of performance. He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. She looked back, and for the first time in 4 months, the professional composure shifted, very slightly, almost invisibly, into something that was not composure at all but was trying to look like it. She picked up her copy of the report. I'll have the full reconciliation done by Thursday. June, he said. She stopped. He had not planned what came next. This was unusual. He planned most things. Have dinner with me. A long pause, the kind that had weight. That's not a good idea, she said. Probably not, he agreed. You're my employer, I'm aware, and you're… She did not finish the sentence, but she did not need to. They both knew what the unfinished part contained. I know what I am, he said. I'm asking anyway. She stood in his doorway for another moment. She was doing the calculation again. He could see it, the same one she'd run before, the same refusal to make a decision before all the variables were accounted for. He had learned in the months of watching her work that she was not a person who flinched at complexity. She simply needed to look at it directly before she moved. One dinner, she said. One dinner, he said. He took her to a small Italian place in River North that most people did not know existed because it had no sign and no online presence, and required a personal introduction to get a table. It was not a performance of wealth. He was past the age of using restaurants to impress people. It was simply a place where they could sit without being watched, which was for him a luxury that required considerable logistical architecture. She wore a deep blue dress and did not apologize for how she looked in it, which he found himself thinking about at a length that was probably disproportionate. They ate and they talked, genuinely talked, in the way that two careful private people can talk when they decide, together and without announcing it, to be temporarily less careful. She told him about Ohio, about the accounting firm, in more detail than she had offered before, about the way she had sat in her supervisor's office while he explained, with great patience and very little eye contact, that the world was more complicated than her textbooks had suggested. She had looked at him and said that she understood that the world was complicated, and that the complexity was exactly why the numbers had to be honest. She had been escorted out with a cardboard box 40 minutes later. Were you surprised? He asked. She considered this seriously the way she considered most things. Not really. I knew what I was doing when I did it. I just thought. She paused, looked at her glass. I think I assumed that being right would matter more. It did matter, he said. It just didn't change anything. It didn't. He looked at her. It changed you, though. She met his eyes. Yes, she said. It did. He did not say what he was thinking, which was that what it had changed her into, careful, precise, entirely clear-eyed about the distance between how things should work and how they worked, was someone he had not expected to find, and was not entirely sure what to do with, now that he had. She looked at him for a moment. You're thinking something, she said. You get a very particular expression when you're thinking something you've decided not to say. He raised an eyebrow. I do. You go very still. Stiller than usual, which is saying something. She said it with the neutrality of someone reading a column of figures aloud. You don't have to tell me what it is. I know I don't, he said. But you can, she said. and the way she said it, not as an invitation so much as a simple statement of availability, was the most unguarded thing he had heard from her in 5 months. He looked at her across a table in a restaurant where no one could see them and said, "I was not expecting you." She was quiet. She looked down at her glass and then back up at him, and something in her expression had shifted, opened slightly, the way a door opens when the pressure on both sides finally equalizes. "I don't know what to do with that," she said. Her voice was honest. "Neither do I," he said. "But I've spent 20 years being certain about things I should have questioned. I'd rather be uncertain about something real." She looked at him for a long moment, and then quietly, almost to herself, "Okay, just that okay." He did not press for more. He understood that okay from June Mallory was not a concession or a capitulation. It was a first number in a calculation she was willing to run. That was enough. Months later, his Lieutenant Vincent would make the mistake of referencing June in a meeting, specifically, of noting her presence in the organization, in a tone that carried an implication about judgment, about the optics of the boss keeping on staff a woman he had clearly developed feelings for. Dominic did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He turned and looked at Vincent in the way that people in his world had learned to register as the moment you stopped speaking. "She has flagged $83,000 in internal discrepancies in 7 months, he said. "She has tightened our reconciliation rate to better than 99% accuracy. She has done more to protect this organization's financial architecture than anyone who sat in that chair before her." A pause. "And you will not speak about her again in a room I am in unless it is to report her work. Are we clear?" Vincent was clear. It was a Wednesday evening, late, when she was the last one in the office. She had a desk near the window. She had asked for it specifically, because she liked to think with the city in her peripheral vision, the lights of the grid spread out below like a spreadsheet she had not yet been asked to balance. She was going through a set of flagged transactions, her reading glasses on, her coffee long cold, when the door opened and Dominic came in. He had been in a meeting that had run late. She could tell by the particular set of his shoulders, the way his jacket was carried over his arm instead of worn. He saw the light on. He stopped in the doorway. "You should go home," he said. 40 minutes, she said without looking up. "There's something off in this column and it's going to bother me all night if I leave it." He set his jacket over a chair. He sat across from her, said nothing, and waited. She found it 11 minutes later, not 40, an inverted entry, elegant in its simplicity, the kind of error that was technically possible to make by accident, but in context almost certainly wasn't. She circled it in red and looked up. He was watching her. He had been watching her for 11 minutes, and had apparently found this to be a reasonable use of his time. "Found it," she said. "I know," he said. "I could tell. How? You breathe differently when you're close." He said it simply, the way she said numbers, as a statement of observed fact. She looked at him over the rims of her glasses. Something had stopped performing, somewhere behind her sternum. Something that had been holding a door closed had, quietly and without announcement, stepped aside. "Dominic," she said, his name, not his title. "June," he said. And outside, the city went on doing what cities do, indifferent, enormous, full of people moving through their lives in straight lines that curved, eventually, toward something they had not seen coming. Inside, the light stayed on for a long time.